All right.
Sorry. 8
I
to
mean,
9:30.
So, everybody, yesterday we went over what's the name of that tool?
Radio arm saw.
Radial arm saw. What did we use it for?
Cutting what?
Length.
Line.
Cutting our boards to length. So that means we were doing a cross cut, right? We're cutting across the grain. Today we're going to learn how to cut with the grain, and you're going to learn how to cut your boards to width. Okay? But before we do that, I just want to explain one thing. If you're going to start a hobby of woodworking at home, the first tool I'd have you buy is a table saw. Because you can get a lot done with a table saw, a router, and a jigsaw.
Can I feel the
Okay?
table saw?
Just those few things. You can cut across the grain on the table saw. We just don't do it here because we've got a radial arm saw and it makes it a little bit safer. But if you have a table saw, you have to have something like this called a miter gauge or a crosscut box that rides in both of these slots. And what you do is you put your piece against that and you can do cross cuts. All right? So you can cut your pieces to length. It's just a little more awkward on the table saw than it is if you have a chop saw or a radial arm saw. Okay? What you don't ever want to do, and I've seen people do this, adults have come in here and done this the wrong way. You never want to use the fence and put the end of your board against the fence and try to cut your board the length that way. All right? What's going to happen is this board's going to want to walk like that, and as soon as it walks away from that, you're going to get a kickback. It's a very dangerous situation to be in. All right? So you never want to run it that way, ever. Got that? Okay, so we're only going to be using the table saw to cut our pieces to width in here because we have that other tool there to cut them to length. So we don't have to worry about that, but it's good to know. Okay, the first thing you're going to do when you come to the table saw is you're going to check the blade height. Okay, you're going to put your board, whatever it is you're cutting, put it next to the blade. You may come in here one day and the blade may be, really high because somebody before you was cutting something thicker. You could use it like this, but it just makes it more dangerous. So we're going to minimize the danger right away by lowering the blade. Okay, so let's lower the blade so we have about one tooth above the board like this. All right, the second thing I want to make sure I have in is one of these. It's called a riving knife, R-I-V-I-N-G, riving, okay? Also known as a splitter. Splitter is a little bit different. We have a splitter here, all right? This would fit down in there like this. It's got some anti-kickback feet. It's got this guard on it, all right? It basically does the same thing. The most important part of the splitter is this metal portion, okay? The metal portion, what it does is it prevents kickback 99% of the time, maybe 99.9% of the time. It's very important, okay? It does it two ways. The first way it does it is it keeps your board kerf open. So one of three things is going to happen when you're cutting, okay? Because when a tree grows in the forest, it's not going to grow perfectly straight, right? So when you cut that tree down and you make boards out of it, it's going to have some internal stress inside the board. And when you start to cut the board, you're going to relieve that stress, okay? So one of three things is going to happen. When you're cutting, it's either going to stay perfectly parallel, which means great, there's no stress in the board, it just cuts perfectly straight. Or as you're cutting, you might see it start to open up back here, like it's pushing itself apart. That's not a big deal either, okay? The problem comes when you're cutting and the board wants to pinch back on itself. If you don't have a riving knife or a splitter in, it's gonna pinch on the back of the blade and make it very difficult to push it through, and it's gonna wanna kick back at you. So as long as you have the riving knife in, it won't pinch on the blade, it'll hold that kerf open just enough, and you can make that cut more safe, all right, in a safer way. The other thing that it can do is it can keep your board against the fence. So as you're cutting your piece, as soon as you get to the riving knife, that riving knife will keep that board from coming out away from the fence and riding over the top of the back of the blade and kicking back that way. Okay, so those are the two ways that the riving knife is important. Okay, now I'll explain one accident that happened. It wasn't my accident, it was somebody else's accident. They came in here, the riving knife had been taken out because someone was cutting pieces for a bowl, and it wasn't put back in, and the person who started the cut didn't realize that the riving knife wasn't in place. So they were cutting a piece of plywood like this, and what happened was he was cutting in one hand just like this. He had this hand here, and the riving knife wasn't in place. When he got to this point, somehow he pulled it away from the fence slightly. It caught the back of the blade, and it spun just like this and hit him in this hand, broke his hand. All right, so that's one example of why that riving knife or a splitter is so important. If he had that in place, that would have never happened. This would prevent it from coming away from the fence like that and riding across the back of the blade, okay? So you want to be careful and make sure that that's in place. All right, so my blade height is set, my riving knife is in place. The next thing I have to do is I have to set the fence. So if you guys come around this side, I'll show you how that's done. And I'll also show you the control box for this saw while we're here. It's very simple to set the fence. You're gonna raise the handle, and then you can move the fence back and forth like this. All right, sometimes it's tough to move the fence with this red handle because it binds a little bit. So it's better to put your hand up here and do this. Now take a look right over here. You got a little bubble with a red line in the middle. You're gonna use that red line to set your widths. Okay, if you want it to be set up for 9 inches, you guys can come over and look. You just set the red line right on the 9-inch mark and you lock it down. You guys will be doing this in just a minute, so you wanna pay attention. So now the distance between this side of the fence and this side of the tooth is 9 inches, okay? It's very accurate. Second thing I want you to see is the control box for this saw. Okay, this yellow switch is the computer, all right? You don't have to touch the yellow switch ever. That can just stay on. But if you did happen to touch the yellow switch and you shut it off, the saw won't run. So you can't accidentally shut off the safety mechanism, all right, and then turn the saw on, so you don't have to worry about that, all right? But just keep in mind, you don't need the yellow switch. All you need is the red switch, all right? This turns it off and on. So I'm gonna turn it on now. Pull it out, turn it on, push it in to shut it off. Occasionally, you might be standing here and you hit it with your knee during a cut. You can't turn this back on until you get a solid green light. So if you accidentally hit it with your knee, you're gonna have to wait a second, watch, all right, and then see the green light, and then you can turn it back on after that. The other thing you'll notice is you have a steady green light here, right? If I touch this with my finger, take a look at the lights. So it's always monitoring the blade. That voltage that we talked about earlier, it's always being monitored. So if you happen to touch it, it should stop the blade within 2 milliseconds. All right? You guys all understand this side? All right, now I'm gonna have you go back around the other side. I'm gonna show you how to stand, how to hold your hands, the whole process of making a cut safely, okay? So we'll bring this over just a little bit closer. All right, so the first thing, you need safety glasses anytime you're using the table saw, so you're gonna have those on, okay? When you turn the saw on, I want you to have the board behind the red throat plate. All right, see this plate right here? It's called the throat of the saw. This is the throat plate. Make sure it's behind that. And then you're gonna reach down with your left hand and turn the saw on. I like you to get in the habit of that, because if you hold it with your left hand and reach down with your right, it's fine when you have a little piece like this, but if you have an 8 or 10 foot piece, you're gonna need to hold it back here to hold the weight of it, and then turn it on, all right? So this is what you're gonna do in just a minute. I'm gonna have each of you do this without any power on, so I can see that you guys understand exactly what I'm telling you right now. If it looks like you have the technique down correctly, I'm gonna have you reset the fence and you're gonna make one live cut, okay? Sound good? So pay attention. The board's behind the red. I pretend to turn it on. My left hip is gonna go right up against the rail here, all right? You can't really reach from back here. You have to get close to the saw. So I want you to get comfortable with the saw, and you're gonna put your hip here. One thing you're gonna notice, I'm standing to the left of the blade, okay? That's just another safety precaution. So now if there's a kickback, where does it go, Colby? It goes right by me, all right? If I'm standing back here and there's a kickback, bad news, right? Okay, so you wanna stand to the left. You don't wanna be hit. So that's another safety precaution. Your left hand is gonna be your holding hand, all right? What I like to do is have my knuckles go down on the table like this. This whole finger is gonna go against the edge of the board and hold it tight to the fence. The thumb is gonna go on top. Now it's best if you can put your hand right behind this throat plate, all the way up there. That gives you a little more leverage, okay? Because remember, this blade's going around at 5,000 times a minute. That's fast, okay? So that's gonna have a tendency to wanna lift the board up off the table. So you do have to put a little pressure on the top. If you have your hand here, you've got more leverage for that. If you're nervous and you put your hand back here, it takes away your leverage. So it'll ride up real easily. So you want to keep your hand right there, okay? And you can just leave that hand right where it is, okay? It's almost like it's screwed to the table. And your board goes past your hand like this, okay? If you have a board that is really rough and you're worried that it's going to give you splinters, what I suggest is you can start back here, okay? Feed it in, stop, come back, feed it in, stop, and come back like that. If it's a smooth edge, like a lot of the wood we use in here, you can just leave your hand like that and let it ride right by it, okay? So if it's a long board, you're going to start feeding it through. You're going to reach back, feed it through some more until the back end reaches the table. When the back end reaches the table, that's when you can decide whether or not you want to use a push stick. If you're this close to the blade, you have to use a push stick in here, okay? If it's over there, I suggest you use your hand because you'll have your thumb plus 4 points of contact. You have a lot more contact than just this little push stick. But when you're this close, I want you to have your hand up and away from the blade as much as possible, okay? So at this point, like I said, your back end reaches the table. You're gonna grab your push stick, put it on the back, right in the middle, okay? Have it angled slightly towards the fence. Not a lot, because you don't want to slide, just a little bit towards the fence so that back edge will stay tight. Once you have your push stick on there, you can start pushing. You can drop this hand out of the way. And at this point, there's really no chance for a kickback, so you can turn your body and push this board through, just like this. Okay, you want to catch that for me? Thank you. Now, one thing that I see students do a lot is they get nervous at that point. So they do everything right. They put the push stick on. At this point, they get nervous and they actually back up. If you back up like this is going to put you in a worse position because now my hand has to travel over the top of the blade in order to finish this cut. If you just get a little bit of confidence and you turn your body, your hand will be to the right of the blade and you can finish the cut. Make sense? Now, lastly, when you're cutting, you're going to get to this point right here. The board is going to be completely cut through, and typically kids stop cutting, stop right there, and they pick this up. What I want you guys to do is I want you to get it past the blade, all right, all the way to the back to there, because I don't want you to depend on the person catching to pull it out. I want you to be the one to control that, all right? And that brings me to my final point. Anytime you're using the table saw in here, you're going to have somebody catch you. You're not going to use the table saw alone. At the beginning, it's going to be me catching for you, because what I'm going to be doing is, as you're starting out, is I'm going to watch your technique and make sure that it stays consistent and you get better and better as you go, and I'll correct you as necessary, okay? But after a while, what I hope is that you guys will become more independent and you can help each other out, all right? If you're helping each other out when you're catching, when you catch, I just want you to catch the weight of the wood. I don't want you to grab it and start pulling, all right? You might think you're helping them, but actually you might be putting a little more stress on them because they're not comfortable going as quick as you're going. So just let them dictate how fast they go and you guys just catch the weight, okay? After you catch the board, I don't want you to hand the board back over the top of the blade. Either hand it back over here or put it over here. If you go like this to hand it over the top of the blade and you accidentally drop it, this is going to kick back at them. All right, so you want to try to avoid handing anything over the top of the blade. Any questions? That was a lot. Think you got it? Yeah? All right. So let's see. Let's get the two people that have to leave it at 2:45 or 1:45 first. Henry?
Second.
And then Ashton.